Right. The videos for chapter 9 are much shorter than chapter 6 because a lot of the concepts overlap between the two chapters. So this will be the second video for chapter 9, and we'll go through a little bit more of the changes that are happening in compensation across organizations. One thing we have to think about as HR professionals or even managers who are implementing or making decisions around compensation is that our salary structures and through the job analysis we do, through the job evaluation, if we do a more internal pricing for our jobs, or even if we do market pricing, we have to make sure that our employees accept and are okay with the salary structure we have. When I say accept, it doesn't mean that they love their pay, but that they understand why they're paid what they're paid, especially compared to other employees within the organization. Equity theory would say that employees have to accept both the job analysis and the job evaluation as processes that created a system that's fair, so that the system can achieve its purpose. If for some reason employees don't think job analysis was fair or wasn't conducted very well, or if they think the job evaluation, which for a lot of organizations might be more likely to be to lead to some strife for employees. If they don't understand the job evaluation and how jobs got categorized or into the hierarchy the way they did, then they might see that their pay is unfair, even if they're actually satisfied with the actual pay that they get. So that it's really important for managers, especially, but HR as well, to communicate how these processes were done, and then how decisions were made around which jobs went where in that hierarchy. Expectancy theory would say that you have to focus more on performance because people are more worried that their performance has to meet a certain threshold in order to be recognized to get the rewards that they want. And so they would say that you need to look at performance as part of pay, and that might be the variable part of pay where people's performance determines how much above their base pay they're going to earn from year to year. If you do that, though, expectancy theory would also say you have to communicate to employees how that performance pay is being determined. And again, as I mentioned in, I think the end of chapter 6, if you have performance metrics that are individually based, those are much more motivating for employees, but they can be harder to measure than maybe organizational metrics. If you're paying your employees based on the performance of the organization, that connection between the work that they do and the performance of the organization is much further away from them and may not be very motivating to some employees, especially if they don't understand how their job contributes directly to the performance of the organization. And again, we have job clusters. We use a lot of job clusters here is not exactly the same thing as job families or job groups, but job clusters are the kinds of types of jobs that could be in job groups or job families. They influence the salary structure as well when we think about market pricing. So that's what this slide is about, how market pricing influences for job clusters, the pay for the jobs within those clusters. So for example, our one thing I really like about this textbook is it explains this much more or more succinctly than I've seen other HR textbooks talk about it. And that's because for economists, job clusters are really important for understanding pay because they study more of the market pay. That's what they can see much better. And job clusters help them cluster jobs that are very similar to each other in determining the differences in pay across organizations, for example. So employees in trades with unions or trade unions, their pay is often determined by the union itself. So there's not a lot of variation in pay within that market, but it also often is people who have either very specific skills that they've learned through doing that trade, or people who are less skilled but can learn on the job. So things like construction, printing and publishing, railroads, longshoring and maritime work and entertainment are some of the job clusters that have unions that really predominate. Even if you're in an organization where that kind of work is not unionized, the fact that other organizations have people in those same jobs that are unionized affects your pay. So unions can affect the pay for everyone who has that job role across organizations, regardless of whether the organization has a union or not. Well-organized and competitive labor markets. Well-organized meaning it's very clear how you get into that labor market. So you get a certain amount of education. There's lots of people who get that. And the competitive labor market is all of the people who have that are competing for the same job. So a lot of you, for example, will be in this kind of job market when you graduate because you'll have your bachelor's degree, or if you're working on a master's, you'll have your master's. And then you will be in a market with other people who just got their bachelor's and master's degrees. They may have very little work experience or no work experience at all, depending on what some of you have been doing while you've been in school, or if you went back to get your degree. And that can put you in a very competitive labor market. And also in these labor markets, when they're not unionized, a lot of the pay then is market oriented. So you determine what other people in the market are paying, and that's how you pay your employees as well. Examples would be like banks, insurance companies, department stores, restaurants. Some of the examples I've already used where in some of these you have a lot of entry level work where people are trained to do the work or they don't need a lot of skills to join the industry. It can also be when you get higher up, for example, in banks and insurance companies, you might have people with actuarial degrees, for example, or finance degrees, in which case they're in a market with lots of other people with those degrees who may or may not have similar experience. And so it's somewhat competitive. And so you're just trying to pull the best people out of that market to join your organization. And so you're going to look at what the market's paying to determine how you want to pay for those jobs. Professionals are also in this often in these well-organized competitive labor markets, and they're usually not unionized. So professionals could be like engineers, attorneys, even people like myself who are educators with PhDs. If you had to go to school for a long time, or you had to do some kind of, I don't want to say apprenticeship, but you had to have a lot of training to do the job that you're in, that's probably considered a professional in this term. And then usually your pay is market-based as well. And then for specialized jobs in labor markets that don't have adequate grading and pricing, or there's no unionization at all, you have to use an internal salary structure because it's really hard to find information about how to pay for those specific job roles or with like out in the market. Either people don't have those jobs, the jobs aren't very common, or the information is not readily available to figure out what people are paying for those jobs. So an example that I think will be very common for some of you that's happening today is there's a lot of companies that are trying to acquire people with AI skills. And so it's very unclear how to pay for those skills because a lot of people are just developing those skills and not a lot of people have expertise yet in AI. But you can see even really large companies like Meta, for example, where they were willing to pay billions of dollars potentially for people with some of these AI skills. That is unheard of. We don't usually pay, unless it's like a CEO, we don't pay billions of dollars for someone with specific skill set, but that's what they were willing to pay to get someone with this expertise because it's so uncommon right now and unique. And so that would be an example of a specialized job market. There's a lot of other changes going on in our economy, and I think this is actually a really fascinating time to take this class because there's a lot of things that are going on within the economy, but also within our political system that's trying to change this, or at least trying to stop some of these changes from happening as rapidly as they are. So one is that in our economy, a lot of the jobs that we have are outsourced, and that's becoming more and more common. Partially, the outsourcing is because we don't have a lot of low level or or very low skilled employees available to fill all the jobs that we have where we need lower skilled employees. Some of it is because a lot of jobs can be done remotely, and so we can pay people in other countries, for example, to do analytical work and for a much cheaper price than we can in the US, and they do just as good a job depending on what that work is that we need done. So that's also why outsourcing happens a lot. We also have a lot of pay inequality in the US. Part of this is because we have a shortage of workers with very technical skills. And this could become an even bigger problem in the future if we don't resolve kind of the immigration issues we have in this country, where it can be very difficult to immigrate here and become a permanent resident, even after you've graduated with a college degree with these highly technical skills, because there's so few visas available that companies snatch them up within a day or two of them being released by the government. So this is a problem that I think will continue and get worse in the future. We also have a lot of undocumented immigrants who are unskilled workers. They don't have a specific skill they can sell, and because they're undocumented, they also really can't compete in the same way with people who do have visas or have permission to work in the US. And so that's created a group of people who are probably paid a lot of times under the minimum wage because they don't have a lot of ability to control their pay or to go to the courts to fix their pay without revealing that they're undocumented as well. So you have these highly technical skills that we need, and we're willing to pay more and more for those. And then a lot of unskilled workers where we're not as willing to pay for them. And sometimes because of the situation they're in, they're underpaid, in fact. Technology also requires, with all of the changes that we have, including AI, it requires higher levels of education and training to work with. And this can increase salaries, but it does mean that people who are not willing to um, learn those skills or who, came out of college decades ago where they weren't using this technology might be left behind in terms of compensation. We also have what we call boundaryless organizations increasing. So this isn't just the flattened hierarchy in organizations where we're getting rid of managers or we're getting rid of a lot of levels of supervisors that we have. It also is because we have a lot of contract work going on in organizations where instead of hiring an employee, you'll contract with someone for a short period of time to do a very specific project. You negotiate their pay with them. They provide their own tools and equipment to do that work. That's a boundaryless organization. If you're doing a lot of work that way and you're hiring contractors to do this work from project to project, these people are not your employees. You don't control them in the same way as you would an employee. You're also not paying them in the same way. They don't get benefits. You don't have to provide a workspace for them. You don't control their schedules and stuff. And so that creates this boundaryless organization idea. We also have a lot of job design changes where jobs are very fluid, especially based on skills and competencies. And then we have employees working on a variety of tasks and numerous work groups. And those tasks and work groups can be constantly changing as well. As I mentioned as well, the employment relationship is changing. We have fewer career paths within organizations, and they're not. I'm sure if some of you have had this experience where you've interviewed for a job and the career path that they're telling you, they're really telling you is kind of dependent on what you want to do. And that's because they kind of have a fuzzy career path. It's not everyone does this, goes through this organization this way if they're going to build their careers in the organization. That can be a great thing for people because that can mean that they can kind of explore what they're interested in and use their strengths to build their careers. It can also be very nebulous then, like how do I move up in this organization if it's not clear how to get promoted? We're shifting a lot more to market pricing in organizations because it's easier, but also because a lot of the jobs that we need are professionals or people with high technical skills, where the market's going to determine the price for those employees. Skill acquisition and professional development is often used to increase pay. So instead of getting promoted to a new job role, you would increase the skill level you have or the competencies you have and then get paid for that. And then there's more emphasis on performance than there was in the past. As I mentioned, broadbanding is becoming more common. And then instead of using your job role and getting promoted to figure out where you are in the broadband, a lot of times the competencies and performance also determine your placement within the band so that people who are higher up in a band might be people who have higher performance evaluations or have developed more competencies either before or during their time in that organization, and that people lower on the band either had poorer performance evaluations or they're still new and they don't have as many competencies as other employees. We also have person-based structures becoming more popular where we're paying for skills or competencies, and then variable pay, as I mentioned in chapter 6, is becoming more common, and a lot of times it's based on the performance of either the individual teams that they're on or even the organization itself.